Hello and welcome to episode number 102 of the Maximizing E-commerce podcast. My name is Kevin, your host, and I'm super excited that you are here today because we are talking today about selling internationally on Amazon. So you might be asking yourself, is it worth selling on international platforms for Amazon? You know, they've got all these different marketplaces all over the world. Is it worth it? So I want to give you a quick little spoiler alert. My personal belief is yes, it is definitely worth it. And we'll get into why that is. So just to give you a little bit of background, in case you're not familiar, I sell on, at this point, it's 10 marketplaces that I've made sales on Amazon, and they keep emailing me with more and more different options. And so you might be getting some of those emails from Amazon where you're trying to decide, is this worth my time or not? I would say definitely you want to focus on the fundamentals and really focus in on those core marketplaces like Canada or UK, which I would say are the low-hanging fruit. So now, just to give you a little bit more context about why I think it's such a good opportunity, I'm going to go into that here in this episode. So just to kind of just dive right into it. So first off, I think selling internationally on Amazon is a great way to make sales. And so when you think about it, if you're selling on Amazon in the US and similar products are selling internationally, chances are you're probably leaving money on the table because customers are already looking up keywords similar to yours, or in some marketplaces like Germany, maybe you have to translate it, but in some word they're using to describe a product similar to yours and they're buying it. And chances are that your competitor, and it could be your product if it was available for sale. So it's one of those things that, we'll get into more of some of the other options of what you could be doing, but I just tend to find selling internationally is such a phenomenal way to grow your sales. And so for those of you who are watching this via video, I'm going to share my screen here real quick. But basically, this is just to go over my numbers from the holiday season. So this is this past holiday season. I had based on the 30 days going into Christmas Eve. So basically Christmas Eve going back 30 days, my sales in the US were just shy of $72,000 in Amazon in the US. I mean, it's a respectable month. It's a good solid month. I would have been leaving a lot of money on the table had I not been selling in other marketplaces. So if you add it all up together, I got another 56% bump in my sales by selling internationally. And so that was basically made an almost $72,000 month, about $112,000 month. So it's an extra 40 ish $1,000 that I was able to add in top line revenue that I would have not have gotten if I didn't just basically take my products that I was already selling and offering them in other marketplaces. And so you can do the math for yourself. Like let's just say hypothetically, maybe the holiday season is not the busy time for you. Maybe, back to school is very busy for you. I've had clients who, that's their busy season, or the springtime is your busy time, or the summer or the winter, just depends on your product. So depending on whatever that key time is for you, chances are there's probably a similar season somewhere else in other marketplaces. And then just in just regular course of business, I just shared there some numbers for, what is my peak time, which is, the holiday selling season. Well, there's 11 other months out of the year, and I still am getting a huge bump internationally. And so, for me, over the course of the years, selling internationally has been a 6-figure revenue stream for my business on top of what I was selling in the US. And, it really is going into kind of really my next point, a great way to diversify your revenue. And so, as I was saying, when you look at, the revenue that you're bringing in and you're comparing it to, what maybe you would have gotten in the US is always going to be, for just about everybody I've spoken with, going to be the dominant sales channel. So everything else, you're trying to find all these peripheral sales channels, and the US sales channel, maybe you might get another 10, 20% in Canada. Maybe you get another 10 to 30% in the UK. It just depends on your product. You'll never know until you try it out. But one of the things I came to find for myself, the products I sell, as I was just mentioning, I do pretty well around the holiday season because my products are very giftable. Well, when the pandemic started and everybody was locked down pretty much everywhere in the US, my sales took a big plummet. In fact, they were at one point, if you were to say late March to late April, kind of that 30-day time period, if you compared it to the year prior, it was down 80% year over year. I mean, that was a very scary time period, as I'm sure you could imagine. But I was getting sales in, I was actually growing in the UK. Canada was holding solid. And so part of the issues that we had in the US were inventory based issues. Like you couldn't send in inventory, FBA inventory for a time period unless you had a essential product. And that wasn't happening elsewhere. And so, you know, yes, from time to time, some of the international marketplaces have had inventory challenges, but usually those are growth issues. And so they're building more warehouses all over the world. And so what I would say is, again, you are leaving money on the table if you are not selling internationally, because it's a great way to diversify your sales. Because think of it this way. You have two ways to grow your top line sales: sell more products or sell to more people. And so if you can sell to more people, you can take your existing product line and increase it. Because as I'm sure you probably can imagine, if you're selling on Amazon for whatever product you're selling, there's kind of a ceiling of what your potential sales could be for that product. Yeah, you might eke out a few more sales here and there because maybe you started targeting this long tail keyword that nobody found. Somehow magically you found it. Although chances are everyone else is looking at the same data you are. So your competitors probably have similar tools. Even if they don't have the same tool, they probably have something similar. And so, you know, it's like all this data is kind of hiding in plain sight when you're selling on Amazon. So point being, there's only so much you can really eke out of growth for a particular product once you're firing on full cylinders. Now, if you're just launching the product, you kind of got to still get that up and going in the US. But very quickly you'll find, you know, you'll hit that ceiling and you're trying to find like, where else can I go? And so what I was saying before is you can also start selling more products, but now you're, you know, launching can be expensive, especially if, you know, you have any sort of giveaways or discounts, or, you know, even if you're just doing aggressive PPC campaigns until you start getting reviews. Either way, it's going to be expensive initially to do that. And, you know, you're not going to have the same sales velocity in the beginning as you do in, once you're up and running. And so the nice thing is, and when you're selling internationally, if you use the same ASIN or UPC, when you list the product, your images will carry over, which is okay, simple enough. But then also your reviews will carry over. So you're not starting over from scratch. And so here you'll think of it this way: a whole different group of people that weren't going on Amazon.com, they're going to Amazon.ca or Amazon.co.uk or Amazon.de or Amazon.com.au, whatever country they live in, they're going to their own individual Amazon and they are purchasing products there. And so I would say, again, if you're not selling in these international marketplaces, you are just leaving money on the table, because it's such a great way to diversify your sales. And, you know, when we talk about diversifying sales, we got to get into my next point, which is international versus, let's say, other marketplaces, Walmart, Etsy, eBay. Which, should you sell in those places? Absolutely. If you can get additional sales, great. Just to share a personal story, I started selling in 2016. I had basically taken a season's worth of earnings as a high school football official. So yeah, I wore like a black and white striped shirt, throwing around a yellow flag. This is American style football, just to be clear. And, you know, blowing a whistle, all that fun stuff. Friday Night Lights, as we used to call it, or I think people still call it that. I'm no longer a football official, but I did it for 10 seasons. And I took 1 season's of earnings in the fall of 2015 to invest to get started in 2016. And very quickly, I learned, back to what I was saying before, you can sell more products or you can sell to more people. I wanted to find more people. And so very quickly, I was finding that my return on the investment of time to take the product I was already selling, because at the time I only had one product, and I offer on eBay, I offer it on tried to get in some other marketplaces, Newegg. I don't even know if it's still around. I tried selling at other places. I actually tried getting on Sears. Sears.com was something people were talking about at the time and no longer are. But maybe fast forward about a year or so, I started selling on jet.com, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. This is another marketplace. This is something that people are at the time, people were talking about jet.com. I probably spent a good couple of weeks. And keep in mind, I had a full-time job at the time. So I had very compressed time that I could spend on my business. And in that compressed time, I was only able to eke out, after spending all this time, I got maybe $500 in sales. And keep in mind, I had to figure out software to like get into their back end. Their terms of service is completely different. How you list products, everything. It just took so much time to figure it out. And I maybe got $500 that year. And maybe the following year, maybe made 1 or 2 sales. Like it just tanked very quickly. And you look at some of these other marketplaces and they can be good. It's definitely worth trying out. But one thing I've come to learn, comparing notes, at best, I've heard maybe 1 or 2 people say that their sales on walmart.com in the US slightly beat their Canadian sales on Amazon. And so most people I talk to, it generally tends to be US Amazon sales, UK or Canada, depending on, sometimes they're neck and neck. Sometimes one's more than the other. Just sometimes it's just more of a cultural fit. Canada culture is, and people's buying habits, I should say, probably more similar in my experience from what I've noticed than buying habits and keywords that people use in the UK. So if you compare it to the US, Canada is going to be more similar. So when you're looking at all these other marketplaces that you could be selling in, again, Amazon.com, it's always going to pretty much for everybody be the top. Canada or UK are usually up there. And then sometimes another international channel. But for a lot of people, if you start getting into another off Amazon channel, maybe their own store does decent percent, maybe 5-10%, if someone's really doing well. So I know some people are crushing it in their own store, but a lot of Amazon sellers I tend to find, it's just such a different skill set to sell in your own store, because it is not the field of dreams. You don't just build it and then people just come to your store. And so it's one of those crazy things that you have to not just figure out fulfillment, because Amazon's no longer taking care of that. You have to figure out customer service, but you also have to figure out getting people there. At least with something like, Etsy, Walmart.com, eBay, those other marketplaces are at least bringing you people. When it's your own store, yeah, your profit margins are generally higher because you don't have to pay a commission to a marketplace, but that's at a cost of, you don't get all the traffic. And so, like for me, it's like on my own store, outside of the holiday season, if I'm getting like 2 sales in a week, I'm like, yes, this is a good week, just to be honest. And I probably could do more if I spent more time on it. But again, it's that, you're trying to decide what to do. So yeah, it can be great having your own store, which I think is still a good presence. But, if it came to, adding your listings in Canada and, filling out a couple forms that you got to do to get up there, going to Canada, going to the UK, I mean, you're leaving money on the table. Then the next point, other than, comparing international selling to other non-Amazon options, I want to talk a little bit about the value of your business increases. And so I've talked on my podcast before, having Joe Valley from Quiet Light Brokerage, which they're phenomenal people over there. Definitely go check them out. And one of the things that Joe talked about is that, let's say you're going to sell your business, and it's all based on, I'm going to oversimplify it here, your profit, which he would call seller's discretionary earnings, I believe is the exact term he would use. But let's just say your profit. And so your profit, and then you can add back some things to the seller's discretionary earnings. But let's just say your profit times a multiple. And usually that multiple is 3 or 4. there's a lot of factors involved in that. And a lot of those factors involved, and whether it might be a 3 or a 4, I've never sold my business, but I'm going with his expertise on this, is that you would get more of a um, higher multiple if your product, or not your product, but if your business had less risk. So if all your sales on Amazon.com, it's a little riskier. If you have like your own email list and you have a few other things, you might get a higher multiple. And so just keep that in mind, that if you can do something to diversify the risk, the multiple will increase a little bit. Chances are it's not going to go from like 3 to 30 because you have a good email list. It might go, you might bump yourself closer, higher up to the 4. There's a variety of factors involved, but just remember that, because we'll come back to that here in just a moment. So just to give an example, let's say you have a business and you're selling on Amazon in the US, and this is Joe's math that we went over together, was that let's say you had $100,000 in profit. Profit's now my word, not his. But let's just say simplistically, you have $100,000 in profit times, let's say, a 3x multiple. So just do the math in your head. And I use this number because it's a round one. It's easy for me to do kind of on the fly. So if you say $100,000 times 3x multiple, that's $300,000, right? That's great. So you get, if you sold your business, you get $300,000, and probably, the cost of, or the value of the inventory. So, but at least the business itself, outside of, figuring out any other assets. So then let's just say, hypothetically, you're going to sell your business, but you're not just on Amazon in the US, you're on Amazon in the US and Amazon Canada. So let's just use some fairly conservative numbers here. So let's just say you had that same $100,000 in profit, right, in the US. And let's just say you had 10% a bump on sales, which could have been higher, but let's just go with the relatively conservative, and also it's easy numbers for my math. So let's just say you had a consistent profit margin, although I tend to find Canada is very profitable. People tend to pay a little bit higher prices there. So it tends to be at least the same, if not even better. And the fact that all of your fixed costs, you're usually not hiring additional warehouse workers just for Canada, or, an additional virtual assistant just for Canada. So, or, your software tools will usually include Canada with it. So let's just go with it that, for simplicity's sake, that it's relative, the profit margins are the same. So 10% increase in sales is also a 10% increase in profit. So $100,000 in profit from the US and $10,000 profit from Canada. So that's $110,000. So in the example we just talked about was a 3x multiple, right? So that would make sense. Okay, so the business would be worth $330,000. So you just got an extra $30,000 bump in sales. But I feel like it's kind of like, those infomercials. But wait, there's more. And so this is, again, very hypothetical, but the way Joe explained it was, well, instead of a 3x multiple, because you added on an international channel, you've diversified a little bit of the risk. So you might get maybe a 3.1 multiple. But this is where the math is kind of magical, as they would say, that your 3.1 multiple isn't just on the Canadian portion of your profit, it's on your total business. So at $110,000 times 3.1, that's actually $341,000. So by selling the products in Canada, and that additional 10% in profit in our hypothetical example gave us a $341,000 valuation, which means the business went up by $41,000 in value on top of the profit and the cash flow that we were getting ongoing. So it's kind of amazing. Now, just in full disclosure, I know that there's some people that might be listening to this who would disagree with me. And I know there's some savvy buyers who say, you know what? I don't want a business that has international channels, because I want to go in and I want to add value to the business. And that's one of the first places I go. And I've heard people argue this before, that they say, they want to look for businesses that they can quickly come in and add value to it. So think about this here for a second. Now, I think anyone in the business brokerage world will tell you there's different types of buyers with different types of tastes. And, people are looking to expand and they don't necessarily always want to start from scratch. So the value of, the business that you might have built over time, whether it's, now or in the future, there's a value to that. And the market recognizes that. And so to say, well, not going to, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not going to do international channels because I want to give it to the buyer to add value to it. Think about that. Unless you're selling your business like in the next few months, you might as well get the value out of it now. And so it's going to increase. Maybe there's certain buyers that wouldn't look for that, but then there's other buyers that might be more attracted to it. So bottom line, get the value where you can. That's really more my point than anything else. So hopefully that made sense. And that's just my personal opinion. And feel free to comment differently if you feel differently. So the last point I want to make about why selling internationally, selling globally is a good thing, because Amazon wants you to. And so I'm a firm believer that if Amazon's reaching out to you, hey, you should find out what it is they're interested in. Are they trying to share something with you? If it's like, let's say, a new ad product or a new something they're trying. And in Amazon world, they're constantly trying different things. And so I came from 2 Fortune 500 companies in my previous life, and it was very rigid structure. There wasn't actually, I'll say both companies, for large of corporations as they were fairly innovative. Innovative. Can I say that way? But anyway, they were pretty good at finding new ways to do things. But Amazon's like a whole other level. And so both of these companies were big companies in the late 90s, whereas, you've probably all seen the picture of Jeff Bezos, like with basically a spray painted sign in his office, which I love that picture, to see what he built over the last, 20 something years. It's like a young adult, is the Amazon. And some of that is because they're constantly trying new things. And so to put it in a little bit more perspective is, in a little more context, I think would be helpful, is I did a summit last year as I record this. Last year, I had a gentleman on named Brad Moss, and Brad used to work for Amazon, and he was the head of Seller Central platform. So he wasn't like a head of all of Seller. He wanted to make sure to like point out that it was the platform. So he wasn't like over all of Seller Central, but the platform, which I guess the way he described it was his job was to work with all these teams that had competing interests at times, which is different than a lot of the Fortune 500 world is. There's different competing interests at Amazon, and they're all trying to get real estate on that first page. So you can imagine when you log in, you see all these widgets. We'll just call them widgets, these little boxes. I tend to find there's at least 2 that are related to global selling, out of, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so. And then there's another widget that's news, and it usually has like the last 3 news articles. And at least one of them, it seems like one of those 3 is almost always an international type topic. So think about how important that real estate is. And the way Brad was explaining it was, they only put stuff on the front page there if there was value in it, if they saw value in it. And they only continued programs if there was value in it. So there's programs they're very excited about, and they come and go. They may not last much longer. And think of this. You're constantly getting bombarded, I would imagine, with selling Singapore, selling Turkey, selling UAE, Saudi Arabia, whatever. They're Australia, Japan. Sometimes they even go back and say, hey, come to Canada. Whatever it is, Amazon's usually reaching back out to you. Why is that? Because it's successful. It's successful for them. And it's not like we're competing necessarily there. They want you to go there because they want to grow the catalog and grow the sales. And what ends up happening is not as many people do it because, oh, there's forms you have to fill out and, tax compliance. Well, there's a cottage industry of people that can help you with all that kind of stuff. And so, point being, it's important to Amazon because it's important to their bottom line. And if you really think about it, if you're an FBA seller or even an FBM seller, if you're selling on Amazon, you're kind of sharing in their bottom line. Yeah, it sometimes feels like they're just, I think there was the famous quote of the seller's margin is their opportunity. It feels that way sometimes. But if you get new opportunities to get new margins that you wouldn't have had elsewhere, meaning new sales and new profits and new cash flow coming in, why not take advantage of it? Especially as I mentioned in a previous point, chances are those sales and profits are going to be higher than going to other places. And the level of what you have to figure out really isn't that different. Because when you're selling globally on Amazon, really to grossly oversimplify it, when you go into another marketplace and it's a Seller Central, the thing that's the most different is the money symbol. You're selling in a different currency. Now you might be saying to yourself, yeah, currencies are hard to figure out. Well, let me just throw this out. So my sister is the principal at an elementary school. And I asked her this question. If I was to say $1 in the US is, let's say, 1.3 Canadian dollars. So therefore, $20 in the US is how many Canadian dollars? Some people might be taking out a calculator. I might have to take out a calculator, but I remember this. And so the fact that a sixth grader would be able to figure out that the answer is 26, because I did the math ahead of time, a sixth grader, so maybe I'm not as smart as a sixth grader, but sixth graders could say that that's 26. Now, anybody with a calculator or Excel spreadsheet could figure that out too. But a sixth grader can figure it out because, according to my sister, that's basic ratios. So I would not let sixth grade level math get in your way of selling internationally. And, when once you kind of figure out, especially if you have somebody that can help you figure out some of these nuances on the figuring out part, is because it's really the hard part is the hoops you have to jump through on the front end. And it can be a little scary because whether you live in the US or you're just used to only selling in the US, and now the idea of figuring out like another country, it can be daunting. But you could take your same listing copy and use that to start out in Canada and the UK. And maybe you tweak it over time, or maybe you just leave it as is. I pretty much, for the most part, leave my listings as is. I use pretty much the same PPC campaigns. I just copy them over. You could do a bulk upload. I mean, it's all simple things that you could do to get started. And so I tend to find those borders that prevent us from going into international marketplaces are more mental than they are physical, like in the physical world. Like I said, Amazon's constantly bombarding you to sell there. They've got all these resources there. And once you get up and running, it kind of runs on autopilot. Like every 2 weeks, you're getting a disbursement, just like you're getting here in the US, assuming you're selling in the US. But you're constantly getting these disbursements and more money. So if you're thinking about selling internationally and you're like, I'd like to learn a little bit more about it, this sounds great, but it's just, there's a lot to figure out. Head on over to globalprofitclass.com. We've got a class. We're going to walk through a little bit more about that. We'll also go, deeper into the why, show you a little bit more kind of in deep, especially visually, some of the whys that we talked about here, but we'll, share some fresh things there as well as you'll also learn not only the why, but the how. We'll show you simple 3-step process to get going, and also show you how to avoid some mistakes that I see people making. And all you got to do is head on over to globalprofitclass.com, and there will also be a link in the description down below, or depending on where you're watching this, maybe there'll even be a button around here somewhere. So depending on where you're watching this, I'm sure where those buttons and links and descriptions are. So I wish you the best, and I wish you the best in your e-commerce journey, and maybe we'll see you in global marketplaces. Take care.